cool. So yes, y'all, we back at it again, man. It's your boy DJ Klyph with another episode of Klyph Notes. And once again, if you have been following along, you know that you can check me out every Saturday night on KXRY X-Ray FM with Welcome to the Neighborhood. A bunch of great music supporting the local scene, but then also with the podcast, we've had a lot of great interviews, man. Connected with some pretty amazing people: Slim Kid Trey, DJ Zimmy, DJ OG1, Jamal Rashad. So much good stuff out here in the Northwest. And today I am honored to have this gentleman take a few minutes out of his super busy schedule to jump through. The first author that I've had on Klyph Notes, so it's pretty cool, man. Let everybody know who you are.
My name is Brian Coleman. Very glad to be here. I'm from Boston, across the old country here, and very glad to be in beautiful Portland on a beautiful day.
No doubt. I always got to give credit where credit is due. So shout out to my man Bruce Poinsett of We Out Here magazine. He hit me up and was like, "Yo, Brian's coming through town, and here's his email if you want to try to connect with him." And I was like, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And
I met him the other night. He was at the University of Oregon, the Boots thing. So yeah, he's a great guy.
Really great guy, really great writer.
Yep.
So once again, shout out to Bruce for making the connect. So speak on that, like right off the bat. You've been here in Oregon. You did the piece over at University of Oregon.
Yeah, I was at University of Oregon in Eugene for about two days, 2 full days. I got in late the night before. And I did Professor Lauren Kajigawa, who's he does a lot of great academic hip-hop stuff there. He's in the music department at the University of Oregon. So he brought me out. I spoke with, he's got a hip-hop seminar class of graduate and undergraduate students. It was cool. There was a good range of kind of ages in that one. So there was one guy who was actually older than I am. He's probably in his early mid 50s, and he was real engaged and interested in everything. And then the next day, last Wednesday, 2 days ago from where we are now, but I did a live on stage interview with Boots Riley from the Coup.
Crazy.
There at University of Oregon. It was cool too because we got dinner beforehand, and I hung out with him afterwards. And just walking down the street, everyone recognized him in Eugene, which was kind of cool. I guess I wouldn't assume that he'd be that recognized. He's a pretty distinctive looking dude, but
right.
And I guess the Coup has performed a lot there in Eugene.
They have, yeah.
And he's really amazing with fans. He's, he'll shake their hand and be like, "What's your name?" and tell me, "What are you doing?" It's not just like, "Yeah, what's up?" and he keeps walking. Like he likes to talk to people and engage. So that was really cool. And the discussion that we had ranged, it was really about his life. And so going all the way back, we talked about, my new book, Check the Technique Volume 2, there's a Coup Steal This Album chapter. Mm-hmm. And so I had spoken with him at some pretty decent depth about his whole history and his whole life. And so he had mentioned to me that when he was a kid, probably 12, 13, he really became obsessed with Prince. So we were talking about his Prince obsession and stuff like that, but also and kind of why he was into Prince and kind of how that shaped the way he looked at music and looked at artists and musicians and things like that. Yeah. But also we talked about his politics and kind of he's also he comes from a bloodline. His bloodline has a lot of social activism in it. Mm-hmm. His dad was a member of the Progressive Labor Party, SDS and CORE in the 60s, and so he kind of came out of that. So we talked a lot about that, about even up to more current his involvement with things like Occupy Oakland and his views on activism and organizing, because he's always really had that. It's never really left him, and he started early. He was organizing at age 14, 15. Wow. So started very early. So it was great. It was great to he's an amazing guy. He's very at turns very hilarious and very serious and super intelligent. So so that was a lot of fun, and so we did that, and then we I'm here now in Portland. Glad to be here.
No doubt, no doubt. And by the time this airs, you will have been here and left your mark and moved on.
Yeah.
But tonight you're going to be over at Compound Gallery.
Yep.
In downtown Portland, meeting people, signing and selling books.
Yep.
So it's going to be a really, really good time. So let's,
should be fun,
going back to that in terms of the books. This is volume 2 of Check the Technique.
Yep.
But for folk who aren't real familiar, let them know what Check the Technique is.
Well, so my first book, which is actually insanely 10 years old now, came out in 2005. It was called Rock Him Told Me. And that was a self-published book. It was about 240 pages, which now seems puny because, which it's not, but my second book was called Check the Technique, and that came out in 2007 on Random House. Mm-hmm. And that was much bigger. That was about 500 pages and 36 chapters. And then the new one came out last October, and that's 25 chapters. So over the course of all 3 books, I've covered 66 albums. And basically I call it invisible liner notes. It's liner notes to albums that never had them, but you always wished they had them.
Right.
So I kind of go back, and the important thing to me is that I talk to the artists themselves. So if I can't get access to an artist, I won't do a chapter on them. So that means some albums get left out. People ask me sometimes if I'm trying to make a canon or, the greatest hip-hop albums of all time, and that I'm not really. They are basically just albums that, as a fan, that I'm very kind of passionate about and that I've grown up with, and they're part of my life. And so there's kind of 2 levels to it. It's very selfish because it's stuff I want to know. Right. But it's also, I know that I'm not the only person who wants to know this stuff. So it's sharing that information that I get with other fans and kind of just putting it together in more of a linear narrative than you might have with. So if you look at the chapters, that's not exactly the way that the conversations go. As you know, if you talk to anyone, and a hip hop artist included, there will be tangents, and you start talking about this and talk about what you had for dinner last night, and that's not always the most newsworthy stuff. So it's kind of shaping these into a more of a linear narrative, which is kind of goes back to. I'm a jazz fan. I used to promote jazz music. I know a lot of jazz artists. And so I've always known the importance and the place of liner notes in jazz music. Okay. And they hold a very different place in jazz music, a more upfront place in jazz versus hip-hop and even rock or reggae or anything else. It's kind of like when you finish a jazz album, the first thing you do is who's going to write the liner notes? So is the producer going to write, or are we going to hire a writer, or am I going to write, or whatever? Because it's always like assumed that that's part of the package. Right. And hip hop, that was just never the case. And I've never really gotten there. There's definitely no vast right wing conspiracy of why there are no hip hop liner notes in any of these albums. Going all the way back, and even to the current day, like there are very few liner notes. Like I'm trying to think, the earliest liner notes that I've ever found on a hip hop album, interestingly, are the first 2 Salt and Pepper records.
Wow.
They actually have liner notes in the kind of jazz style. So liner notes in the traditional jazz sense, going back to the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, were basically whatever text you could fit on the back of an LP.
Gotcha.
There was rarely a booklet. There was rarely a gatefold. It was just some notes on the back of an LP. So that's not a lot of verbiage. So it would be maybe 1,000 words or something like that. And sometimes it was more promotional. It was, this is the greatest swingingest kind of record ever, and sometimes it was very almost like an ad or, like an advertisement that you'd read on the radio. Sometimes it was more serious. There were writers like Nat Hentoff, Leonard Feather, or some of the classic jazz liner notes guys. But hip-hop never had that. And so being a huge hip-hop fan, but also being a jazz fan, I just kind of, figured, why don't I just take the jazz liner notes format and put it to a new genre that's never really had them for the most part. And that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 10 years. So
it's crazy. So going through that process when you decided to truly put it together as a project, who was the first? Which was the first? Which was number one?
Well, the first book, so Rakim Told Me, was basically those were. So what happens, as any journalist out there knows, or if you have a friend who's a journalist, you probably know, you'll do this interview for like an hour and a half, a great interview with whomever, KRS-One or Marley Marl or something, and then and this is, keep in mind, back in the old Paleolithic times when there was actually print magazines out, they would say, okay, great, give us 500 words. Yeah. And that's almost nothing. Like, you can barely write an intro in 500 words. So you'd have all this extra stuff that is just kind of trapped in your transcription folder where you had kind of written everything down. It's just like, man, I wish someone could see this, because, even back in 2005 and certainly back when other things I was writing back in the late 90s, you didn't have an online, you couldn't just put it up on medium.com or on your blog or something like that. So you didn't have an option. Yeah. And so I said, so Rakim Told Me was, I had already done most of those albums for other magazines in very, very much shorter form. And so this was kind of like the director's cut, where I unleashed all of the extra stuff from my files, because there was still tons of amazing stuff. It wasn't like, if you've ever written, like an essay, and everyone has, so just 500, 750 words is just nothing. It's almost painful to, I think the worst case of it that I ever had was back in the early days was, I interviewed KRS-One for 3 hours. The transcription, I write everything out by hand still to this day, which is kind of dumb, but that's the way I do it, was 28 pages long. It was 28 pages of just straight KRS-One quotes, because if you've ever spoken with KRS-One, like, you don't really have to ask him questions. Like, he knows what you want to know. Yeah. And so he just kind of goes and goes and goes, and it's almost this like soliloquy of amazing stuff. Yeah. And sometimes kind of interesting sidebar type things too. Yeah. And so that was a perfect example of something where I was just like, I can't believe I could only do 750 or 1,000 words. I can easily do 5,000 words. Right. And then that's what I did. So there are 21 chapters in Rakim Told Me. And so, yeah, most of them had already been done, ranging from, and so Rakim Told Me was all 80s chapters. So it was Run DMC, Raising Hell, Mantronics, the album, Public Enemy, Nation of Millions, De La Soul, 3 Feet High and Rising. And so that's kind of what I did, is I expanded things that had previously been 500, 750 words to 3,000, 4,000 words. The longest in that book is a chapter on the Ultramagnetic MC's Critical Beatdown that is about 10,000 words. So I kind of went ham on that one. I just went crazy, because they're one of my favorite groups of all time, and I feel one of the most underrated hip-hop groups of that era. And then, so honestly, like, once that template was established, then the next book was just kind of more of the same. It was just reach out to more people. What the first Check the Technique was, the one that came out in 2007, was basically, it included a bunch of chapters from Rakim Told Me, because Random House really wanted those. And I was like, well, I self-published it, and I'd sold something like 2,000 copies, which was amazing. I didn't think I'd get anywhere near that, but it still wasn't like out there everywhere. So I figured if Random House wanted those chapters, why not? And then I'll add an entire new book onto it. So I added all the 90s chapters that I wanted to do, and that would be Fugees, The Score, Beastie Boys, Check Your Head, Far Side, Bizarre Ride, and those kind of up through, I think the latest one I did was The Roots, Do You Want More? So really, only going up through 95. And then this new book starts earlier than ever. So it starts with the Wild Style Breakbeats, back from recorded in 1981. And those are not the soundtrack, the breakbeats that were used in the live sequences from the film Wild Style, which no one's ever really kind of really explored that, and I was always fascinated by that aspect. Going up through, I think the latest was Black Star, Mos Def and Talib Kweli, and Steal This Album really came out, I think, technically in early 1999.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's the thing, too, is I don't cover, quote-unquote, current music.
Right.
I don't cover anything because I think the way I do these, I feel like there needs to be a little bit of time to breathe in between.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people out there saying, oh, this new Kendrick record is an instant classic,
Right.
and I hate that term
Right.
because you don't know that.
Right.
Like, you could say it's a great record,
Yeah.
but instant classic, no.
Yeah.
No, I would never, you'll never hear those words come out of my mouth because I think you need time to live with things and let them either fade and get buried in your crates or sold to Goodwill or to become part of your life. And you don't know.
Yeah.
I'm proud to say that I think a lot of the music that I was listening to, not just hip hop, but just music in general, has kind of stayed with me. I kind of, my initial impulse to buy that record or follow that group was generally on. But there's some stuff, there's some, things I'm not so proud of, my old Howard Jones albums and things like that. But, but that to me, I guess, is the difference, is I do kind of tend to do it in a retro way and kind of, but that also, I think, talking to an artist about a record they made 15, 20, 25 years ago is actually a good thing because right when the records are out, you just don't have everything so crazy. Like, so if I talk to Kendrick right now about To Pimp a Butterfly, he would have such a different vantage point than if I talked to him in 15 years because everything's going on right now and everyone's kissing his butt and you're a genius and this and that. And who knows, like maybe he'll make 5 records that are even better than this one and he'll become this national treasure and, he'll be celebrated at the Smithsonian like we're celebrating Nas and all this stuff. But maybe he won't. Yeah. And you just can't really say that. And so that's why I think you need time to breathe. And also, to be really honest with you, a lot of times it's so much easier to get guys to sit down and talk because right now, right when a huge hit album is out, if you tried to talk to DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince when He's the DJ, I'm the Rapper came out, like that would have been maybe I could have gotten 10 minutes with them. You know what I mean? It would have been a quickie because they had to do 18 other interviews. So, so it's been a pretty incredible ride. I mean, I've been just really incredibly honored to talk to these people, just to have them give their time. And to me as a fan who's not, a big name, and these books are not going to really make or break their careers by any stretch. So just kind of have them give back the respect that I give to them, just to say, I'd be happy to talk to you for a little while and about this. It just means a lot to me. And then to then kind of complete the circle where I do an event with Boots Riley or something like that, and we get to, after the book's out, even dive even deeper is just absolutely incredible.
Well, it's interesting because reading through the books, there are things that I think stand out that make these books stand out, and I've seen a couple of quotes where people have talked about reading as you're going through this conversation with these artists, and then you go track by track, and you get to read these stories of where that came from or what impacted the writing of a particular track. A couple of different people said what I found myself doing was I'm reading the book and then I go and pull out a cassette tape or, pull up my laptop and I got to go listen to this now again. And I would imagine that for some of these artists, as you're talking about these records that came out 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that for them going on that journey again must have been impactful.
It is because, I think the impulse generally, and it depends on the artist. There are some artists who are still touring and making, De La Soul's got this incredible buzz right now because of their Kickstarter, and which is amazing to see. And then other people are not as busy all the time. They do some gigs per year, and they might be involved in still producing. But they definitely. They don't always get asked those questions, and they don't always really reflect like that. So it is good. I remember speaking with Eric Sermon for the EPMD chapter, and we were probably a half hour in, and he was like, "Man, that really was a dope record, wasn't it?" And I was like, "Yeah, right, yes, it was. That's why I'm talking to you." But they forget, like, because think of all the BS you have to put up. Think of all the BS that Eric Sermon has gone through in the record industry from 1988 up until now. Yeah. And that first record was just so innocent for them. It was such a pure record. And that's why I tend to like talking to people about their first album, because that is the real innocent time. It's also the time where you don't necessarily know what the hell you're doing. Yeah. Sometimes you're figuring it out. Sometimes you have a mentor. So people in the Juice Crew of Marley Marl was kind of bringing people in, and he knew what he was doing. Yeah. But even Marley obviously didn't know what he was doing right at the very, very beginning. Yeah. And then other people, like going back to Boots Riley, Boots, basically he didn't know how to really work a sampler. Okay. And he had tried, and he said he could never get the samples to sound the way he wanted to. Mm-hmm. And then the only other option was to get live musicians, and he didn't really know any. So he went to Guitar Center, and he just was hanging out and just saw a guy over there playing the keyboard, trying out this new keyboard. And he's like, "Hey, would you want to be on a record?" So it's not a very scientific. It's very random. And that first person he met just so happened to be this incredible musician. Right. But that's what, like, a lot of times what these stories are about the randomness that everyone experiences in life. It's no one's life is, no matter what, whether you plan it out or not, it never happens the way you think it's going to happen. Right. So it's really about these artistic journeys and how they deal with expectations that they had, and then roadblocks that come up along the way. Yeah. Almost none of these albums, there's nothing easy about it. You know what I mean? Like, I think Redman, I was talking to him, and so he was actually under the auspices of Hit Squad, of Eric Sermon, and they basically just left him in the studio. They said, "Here, we'll be back in a couple days, like, try and just figure some stuff out." And he was just like, "What the hell? Like, I don't know what I'm doing." So, and then Ice Cube in the new book, there's kind of, he famously tells this story that I think I'd heard before, but in different format. But so the Bomb Squad, Public Enemy's production team, he flew out, and there's a whole long story about how he got connected with the Bomb Squad in the first place. But he basically flew out, and keep in mind, this is a guy from L.A., who had just left NWA, very controversially, and been told that you can't work with Dr. Dre, who's like the biggest and best producer in the whole world, who you expected to be working with. So it's like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? So he flies to New York. The Bomb Squad basically picks him up, and they had a clubhouse, which was their pre-production studio, that was 512 Franklin Street in Hempstead, New York, where they're from, in Long Island. And they basically took Sir Jinx and Ice Cube and said, "Here," and there are all these records in there, and they just said, "Go pick your album, and we'll be back in like a couple days." And they just left him there, and they slept like on the floor of the studio, and they would just go through the records and be like, yeah, let's use this one, and we'll sample this one, and we'll do this. But you would think the Bomb Squad would have kind of, coddled them and been like, "All right, here's what we're going to do." Right. But the Bomb Squad, first of all, they were busy, very busy at the time. They were finishing up Fear of a Black Planet. They're producing like the Belle Biv DeVoe record. I mean, they were very hot producers at the time. Yeah. And sometimes it's like that. It's like, for me, a lot of times what I find most interesting, and hopefully other fans and people who read the books find interesting, is the people who you think are these kind of infallible superhuman beings, like Chuck D or Ice-T or Ice Cube. They deal with the same BS that we deal with, like they are not superheroes. They may be superheroes in the way that they deal with the adversity and come through, and they're talented, but they deal with the same kind of BS that you might deal with on a daily basis too. Like, I'm sure they weren't happy when the Bomb Squad was just like, "Here, we'll be back in like 3 or 4 days." This is January in Long Island. It's probably cold as hell. They're from LA. Like, what do we do? Do we make the right decision? Is this crazy? What's going on? And they all came together and made America's Most Wanted, which is one of the great hip hop records of all time. But it wasn't a planned out thing. It wasn't an easy path. But they all did it, and that's really, to me, that's the best thing about all these chapters is every journey that these guys go through is completely different. But there's always, I think that the one thing that's the same about all of them is that there's always some kind of struggle. There's some kind of adversity you go through, and you just work your way through it.
Yeah.
So
that's crazy, man. It's funny as I was going through and looking, and you mentioned a lot of these the chapters that you added. We did the first volume, but I'm looking at a lot of these, and again, being a child of I guess a child of a child of the 80s. I mean, I was I can look at some of these albums, and when they dropped, obviously it takes you back there. But to me, these albums, in terms of hip hop that you picked, a lot of them really changed things to me.
Yeah.
Like I remember the very first time that I heard Paid in Full.
Yeah.
Just like wow, like things are changing. I remember the first time I heard, Run DMC.
Yep.
The Far Side, the Fugees, Digital Underground.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
So I think that that's one of the things that I love about what you've done is that I think you're giving people an opportunity to go back to that time and see where did that even come from? Because when some of these albums came out, it was very innovative for art, Digital Underground in particular. You know, people have been messing around sampling P-Funk a little bit, but not anything the way that they did it.
Yeah.
To really pay homage to what was being done, not just by we sampled some Parliament. Like, no, this is we're keeping it alive, or we're revitalizing it.
Shock G is an amazing musician.
Yeah.
Most people don't really know that as much about him because he's Humpty Hump and he's goofy and all that stuff. But that was and say what Dre did on the Chronic, it went beyond just sampling. It went beyond just, I want to use this little piece of music because it sounds good. They were trying to embody the spirit of P-Funk, because P-Funk, if you grew up in the 70s and were listening to anything, it wasn't necessarily what was on the radio, and you were kind of part of that P-Funk universe, that was just a powerful thing to be part of that army of fans who would show up at P-Funk shows, and just how great their live show was. So yeah, I mean, exactly, Digital Underground tried to recreate that vibe, and they did sample them, but they also, as a group, tried to recreate that as well. And other groups would kind of come along. I mean, definitely Boots and the Coup were very influenced as well by all of that kind of 70s stuff, War and even stuff direct. I mean, the funny thing is they recorded at the Coup recorded. I think they recorded Steal This Album at this place called Hyde Park Studios, and yet again, like, there's not always something scientific about how these things get figured out. But the reason they recorded there is because Boots looked at the liner notes, the listings on the Digital Underground Sex Packets album. He's like, oh, they recorded at Hyde Street. That's where I'm going. So and they were both from the Bay, so obviously there's that link. But it's. I really think that to me the most fascinating thing about any artist is everybody's influenced by something, and everybody's influenced by many things, musically, politically, socially, from your family, from your friends, all that stuff. So the question is, what do you do with those influences? Do you just, like, if you're an artist, do you regurgitate them? Do you do something? So you love Rakim. Do you sound exactly like Rakim? That's not a really very good idea, because no one can sound like Rakim. But so it's kind of how do you take what your influences are, and how do you make a new branch onto the tree? Clearly, you're influenced by it, but you don't copy it. You say, I'm going to take this in another direction. And that's really, I mean, honestly, if you want to really look at all the chapters I've done, that's kind of what it boils down to. I only deal with artists I feel are innovative. So, I'm not going to do anything on Fabulous, because I don't find anything that he does. I find his style to be very derivative, of Rakim, actually, and a bunch of other people. So I'm not interested in how he makes his albums, because I don't really think they're that good. So so I kind of trailblazers, people who innovate, and people who have really kind of, as they come along, have put a new branch onto the tree. They're not trying to reinvent things because there's been so much done already that it's hard to reinvent, but it's kind of how do you synthesize all these influences and make something beautiful out of it that's your own, that reflects your own personality of you as a person.
Right. Do you get the sense that it's more difficult to do that now?
No. I get the sense that I mean, my whole thing is kind of that since about, I would say it even started in somewhere around 96, 97. When I started listening to hip hop and I was most energized, it was the golden era. It was around 1986 to 94, around, which I agree that that's what I would call the golden era. And the main thing about that was you just could not bite, like you could not copy someone else. You had to come correct. You had to be innovative. There was this friendly competition. You know, in New York, I grew up in the East Coast. I went to high school in New Jersey, so I was very influenced by what was going on with Red Alert Show, Mr. Magic on the radio. And everybody was just trying to one-up everyone else, and it was beautiful. It wasn't dissing. It wasn't going after someone. It was just one-upmanship, who could do something even iller. So Q-Tip was like, he heard the Large Professor track, and he's like, oh man, I can beat that. And he did beat it. And then Pete Rock comes along, and he beat that. And like everyone's scrambling. So at some point, and maybe this was just a symptom of hip-hop just becoming so large and people seeing that you could sell that many records, it became obvious that this was going worldwide and this was becoming $1 billion thing, and it wasn't just this New York or LA thing, and which is what it was in the golden age. It wasn't like, if you were 1987, you weren't like, I'm going to become a hip hop artist, I'm going to be a millionaire, dude. You know, like you might be large in your neighborhood or in your city, but like Eric B and Rakim on the cover of Follow the Leader sitting on a Rolls Royce. Like that was not their Rolls Royce. You know what I mean? Like I don't think so. I'd be highly doubtful. That would have been a very poor use of the funds that they had at the time. But once you got into the mid 90s, late 90s, it became with the rise of Bad Boy Records and Rockefeller and stuff like that. Then it was like, wow, first of all, we can make global money. We have all these endorsements, blah, blah, blah. But they also started to realize that as the hip-hop audience became larger, there's always going to be the core of people in hip-hop who are the super fans, right? Who know what's what and know why Rakim is dope and why Hammer's not dope. You know what I mean? And can explain it. But then once things get bigger and bigger and bigger, you start to get these fans on the periphery, on a very large periphery, that are just casual music fans. So, you know, the stuff that Puffy did was very catchy, but it was not innovative. It was really kind of like low-hanging fruit, lowest common denominator stuff. So I think because, and I'm happy to blame Puffy and Rockefeller and all that stuff on the demise of hip-hop as art. Now, keep in mind, there was always an incredible underground movement going on at the same era of stuff that Company Flow, stuff in New York, stuff in L.A. coming out of the Good Life, Freestyle Fellowship, a lot of these groups that there's always been incredible hip-hop music made on the indie labels, on the underground. So I'm just talking about on a kind of popular consciousness grand scheme. But really in my opinion, it really wasn't, it wasn't a crime anymore to copy someone or to do something that was kind of a shortcut, to just do a basic loop where you could chop. And that's why it's cool that someone like Dilla, who came out of that same era, was making stuff that was very catchy and kind of had, it wasn't a super raw feel all the time. But he was still doing very, very artistic, innovative things. If you really kind of put it under a microscope, it was just like, whoa, the stuff he's doing is insane. So I think that there's still a lot of incredible stuff coming out now. It's still almost all of it is on the underground. So, you know, from this region, Shabazz Palaces, I love what Shabazz Palaces is doing. I think it's kind of fascinating for me, or like MF Doom, two guys who were back in the golden era,
Yeah.
With Diggable Planets and with KMD,
Yeah.
who I've covered in my last two books, but also who are now figuring out a way to modify what they're doing to a new audience, or Run the Jewels.
Yeah.
So look at LP. The stuff production-wise that Run the Jewels is doing is very different than Company Flow. It's honestly, it's much more kind of bass heavy, and it's not as raw, really. I mean, there's parts of it that are certainly very raw, but it's incredible to see how these guys, those three guys I just mentioned, have as old men like me, have managed to make things that are of interest to a younger audience. Because a lot of times I think you're kind of stuck with doing the revival stuff and playing at this festival or that festival and being expected to just play your old stuff. So I don't know. I didn't see Run the Jewels. I don't know if they play Company Flow stuff, but they probably don't. Yeah. I don't think they're rocking Vital Nerve, and they don't have to. Yeah. But there's still, when Company Flow gets back together, there's still a ton of fans, and there'll actually probably be even more fans now that are coming to Company Flow through Run the Jewels, which I think is incredible. And hopefully, I think that Ishmael is a lot. He's a lot more kind of low key and secretive about, like, Shabazz Palaces clearly are not. They have a very carefully cultivated image that's not. It's more visual, but not necessarily visual based around the people in the group. Yeah. It's kind of using different iconography and things like that. Yeah. Like if you the last record, I think it's almost like in hieroglyphics, like the interior liner notes, which is kind of fascinating. So, but it'd be amazing to me if people got back to Diggable Planets through Shabazz Palaces, and I think that it does happen where people who are Doom fans get back to KMD through Doom, and so it kind of is really, those to me are the most fascinating things, because it's very difficult to grow old and still try and be relevant to young, because usually it seems like a reach. Usually it seems like you're trying too hard, and you can't always do it. Like, I love the Cold Crush Brothers, and I, unlike some people, that usually the story with the Cold Crush Brothers, who were one of the innovators of MC stuff in the 70s into the early 80s, they did make some great records, but they existed and ruled at a time before hip-hop, before Rapper's Delight. Right. But they tried to kind of modify their sound later in the 80s and the 90s, and it just, I loved them, but it didn't work, because it's not, you can't always do it. Yeah. It's not always easy to kind of talk to a new generation.
Yeah. Well, and I think that some of that may have to do with the fact that even groups that big or areas that big, hip hop was still so young. Yeah. Now you have artists who are, anybody who listens to Welcome to the Neighborhood or the podcast knows I'm a huge De La fan. Yeah. And the fact that they are getting ready to put out another record is pretty amazing. But it feels like hip hop is mature enough as an art form. It's mature enough now that you can have artists who have been doing it for a while who can stay relevant.
Yeah, exactly. And there's always going to be, the thing about De La, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that it is almost impossible to stay together as long, and I'm not talking in hip hop. I'm talking about the Rolling Stones. It's pretty amazing. First of all, they're all still alive, but it's amazing that they're still. Why the hell are they still touring? Yeah. Like, if I had that much money, I would. But obviously they love it, and I don't think anyone's forcing them with the gun to their head to do their 795th tour. But it's really difficult to stay as a unit. And there's almost none that have done it. There's Public Enemy, which are not, Terminator X is not part of it. Right. So technically it's not the original lineup. Right. But De La Soul are one of the only hip hop groups who have remained intact and touring this whole time. It's funny when I talked to Tom Silverman from Tommy Boy Records, he called De La Soul the Grateful Dead of hip hop. And they kind of are, which is a weird thing to think about. Yeah. And it actually is especially provocative because of the whole hippie thing and how they started to resent being called hippies and all this stuff. But he's kind of right, though. And Public Enemy still tour to this day, and I think are still making great records. I mean, I don't know if people are buying them as much as they should, and they really should, because they're still making powerful stuff. Right. But it's very difficult. Really, it's almost impossible for and yet again, like I always try and make sure that it's not like a hip hop thing. It's just think of the group of friends that you had in 1989. You're not still all friends. Right. So when you put in the cauldron of not only being in a group but touring together and having Flavor Flav as one of the people in the group, you can only imagine what Chuck has gone through to keep those guys together. But so it isn't easy, and I think those groups especially need to be commended more than anybody, because and I think that's why the De La thing that's happening now with their Kickstarter is so incredible, but that's the reason is pretty clear to me. It's because they have so much goodwill with their fan base, because they've always gave their fans more than what they hoped. You know what I mean? Yeah. And they've hung with them through all these years, and they're at the 25th high school reunion, and they're still like, "What's up?" Like you feel like De La are part of your family, like they're your cousins or something like that, because they've always been part of your life. And whenever they come to town, you always see them. So I mean, I saw De La the first time probably like 89 or 90, and I still see them today, and they still sound great, and they still have fun, and so for them to now be able to reap those rewards and more than just the money of it, just to not have to deal with the BS of a record label. Now, as they'll learn, it's going to be about logistics and about fulfilling all these records that people have bought in advance. Right. And then now they have to figure out how it's going to, be shipping out hundreds of thousands of records, but that's not a bad problem to have. So.
No doubt. I want to go back just a little bit. So you mentioned Doom, and I actually became an MF Doom fan a little bit later, and I think the thing that made me say I am a fan was when I listened to Food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so after that, then I started going back, and then you're like, oh yeah, I know this.
Yeah.
But then really started delving into a lot of the projects that he'd done, like the Special Herbs stuff. And then going back further and saying, I knew of KMD, but and so I think that's really to me, the fact that you had an opportunity to interview him for the book is amazing, because he seems so reclusive.
He is reclusive. That interview was actually done many years ago. Okay. And I ran it very briefly in a magazine, but I'd always wanted to do. I'd always personally known about the Black Bastards album, KMD's second album, that was actually shelved when it was first. It was about to. It was shelved almost less than a month before it was going to come out, and it was very controversial. And the cover had a very controversial image on it, and this is right in the whole Cop Killer Ice-T aftermath, when record labels that. Big money was there. It was now. There was a big money thing now. All of a sudden, there were shareholders that were complaining. It wasn't just people in the neighborhood. It was hundreds of thousands of shareholders yelling at these record labels, and that's a huge shame. I think that Elektra handled it very badly. I think that they almost destroyed Doom, and he disappeared for many years, a couple years. Really, he went down to Georgia and just kind of got out. His brother Sub Rock, who was the other guy in KMD, had just been killed, and it was just a horrible time for him. So, but kind of what we were talking about earlier is his resilience. And I mean, the MF Doom thing people think is a gimmick, but the mask and all that stuff. But it was really a defense mechanism. It was was really damaged. I mean, him kind of relating to some of these cartoon graphic novel comic book characters was a real thing. It was a coping mechanism for what he was going through. And I mean, the funny thing I remember was when he's first appeared after Operation Doomsday. When the album came out, he toured, and he was wearing the mask, but he hadn't yet figured out it's hard to rhyme through a mask into a microphone. So it sounded horrible. It was like I can't hear a goddamn thing he's saying, and it was crazy. It was like, but he figured that out. Eventually, I think he modified his mask, but it was all very kind of trial and error. And but I think the thing to me, as someone who's always been a fan of Dooms, and Zev Love X was what his original MC name was, is just kind of he reinvented himself and dealt with just this incredible tragedy in his life, in his both personal life and his professional life. And he did really kind of fade away for a minute. And some people would have faded away forever, and he didn't. He kind of came back and slowly kind of clawed his way back and started to realize that making music was his solace. Like, that was how he was going to kind of get through all this stuff. Because he, in the chapter, it explores it pretty in depth about he and Sub Rock. Sub Rock was 2 years younger than he was, but pretty much everyone you talk to would say that they were almost like twins, like Siamese twins. They were so connected that they didn't even like talk sometimes. They were almost, it was like Escape from Witch Mountain, it was like they were communicating telepathically. And so it was, it would, when Sub Rock was killed, it was just beyond devastating to him because they were almost the same person. So it was quite literally like a piece of him died. And just so yet again, like these people are beyond the music. People are human in like what you go through to kind of, and how sometimes art and creating can be what saves you. And so, so that's one of my favorite chapters. And it was an important one for me to try and get as right as possible because it is a serious story. It's a serious thing that happened. And a lot of people don't really know that story. And I didn't know this, like all these chapters, I didn't know the story. I knew parts of it and I knew things I had heard, but I wanted to confirm those things. I wanted to make it, put it down as a concrete thing versus something you read on Wikipedia from what some dude, told you the other night when you were at a club or something like that. And there's a big difference. So. Well,
and I think one of the cool things about that is that, well, a couple cool things. One is that was one of the chapters that you made available for folk to read,
I put that
which
one
is
up,
really, really cool. I think as a person who is maybe a fan of Doom, or maybe a fan of, just kind of a fan of hip hop, but don't really, have questions about things. It does give them more insight. And then thirdly, I think maybe for someone who, there are people out there who will still say, I don't get it. Like, why is this guy rapping with a mask on? I think you do a great job of giving people that opportunity if they're really true to understand, and then to say, oh, okay, I understand, I get it now.
And it doesn't explain everything. I didn't really get as much, so I kind of spoke with Doom more a little bit up through when he became Doom, but it was really more about KMD itself. But I do think that I tried to at least not say here's exactly why he wears the mask, because that's really for him to say, but it's more kind of, I think people get more of an understanding that it's not just a oh ha ha gimmick, this is funny. Cool Keith wearing the Elvis wig is a lot different than Doom wearing that mask. It's a very I personally don't ever think it was a gimmick. I really do think it was like a coping mechanism for him to kind of make his way back into the world that he knew before as an artist. And then it stuck. And then so maybe it became something, whether he feels trapped, like that he can only wear the mask now or not. I think that it's very possible that at some point he will have a third chapter in his artistic life and create a whole new thing where the mask has nothing to do with it. But he's still one of my favorite MCs. I just think he does amazing stuff. And honestly, I think part of his current allure to a lot of people is how reclusive he is. So he's still over in England as far as I'm aware. He was born in England.
Right.
And that's why he kind of got stuck over there. There was some visa stuff. He was over there, and then they wouldn't let him out of the country. I don't even know what the deal was. But, so I think that if that works for him, I mean, being more mysterious, I mean, it's not like he's completely reclusive. If you want to do a track with him and you got some money, then he'll do a track with you. But he's not doing tons of interviews, and I got him at a time when it was really, I think, before the superstar, and obviously superstar is relative, but within the indie hip hop world, before he really started to have the status that he has now, he was interested in talking about Black Bastards, and there had been some time. I mean, I think yet again, sometimes there has to be several years in between where, especially something like that, talking about his brother dying was very raw. So you wouldn't want to talk to him right when that happened. So there were interviews done. It's crazy if people want to do research. I mean, I found at least 3 articles that were written in the general way that you would be doing press for an album for Black Bastards. It was coming out. Yeah. There was a street date. Advanced tapes were sent out, and The Source ran an article. 4080 magazine out of the Bay ran an article. So it's not like they got dropped early. They got dropped at the very last minute. Yeah. And it was there's a lot of kind of shady stuff that went on, and how that, and then it kind of talks about that in the chapter too, about different pressures that were put on Elektra. Yeah. And they weren't all artistic. It was very much, in the end, basically, I think my theory and what other people in the chapter say is that if it was a Snoop Dogg album or a Dre album that was destined to go double platinum, they would have taken the storm that came with that cover of Black Bastards. But they knew it was going to only sell 200,000, and they said, "Is it worth it?" And that's the most messed up thing of all of it, is that they made a choice about this guy's life, really, and they gave him the album. They said, it's not like they shelved it and said, "We're keeping it." They said, "Here, take it. Yeah. Get it away from us. You take it, do what you want. You don't even have to pay us back." But at that point, no one wanted that album. It had a kind of a mark against it, and they took it to other labels, and they were just like, "No, we're not touching that." So it took a while. It took 7 years, 6-7 years for it to finally come out.
It's just an amazing story. You know, it's cool because having you take on this project, which it feels like a lot of it is a labor of love, because, like you said, you're a fan of the art form. Yeah. In an age really where, like you said, I mean, there's opportunities to get out and do research if we want to know more information, but we also live in a time where I like the quick hit. I want to give me the highlights, give me the 144 characters, and I'm golden. Yeah. But to be able to delve a little bit deeper, which is such a part of a lot of cultural history, just the telling of stories, and like you said, you're creating an avenue for these artists to tell their stories in their own words, which I think is dope. Yeah, I mean, I personally hope that all of these artists do their own books. It's not like I'm the only chance they're going to have to tell these stories, but a lot of times they don't. That's not something that's a priority for them. Right. So it's kind of like, and I've actually had artists who are not in the books say, "I'm writing my own book, like I'm not going to talk to you." And I was like, "That's great. I'll buy that book." Yeah. I'm glad to hear that. I'm not offended that you're not going to talk to me. Yeah. Of course, there's 2 of those people who, and this has been 6 or 7 years, have not done their book, and so it's like, all right, whatever, dude. But anyways, I think it's funny, like once back in, I forget when did it come out, 2005, when Pieces to Wait, the 50 Cent book came out, there was all of a sudden within the hip-hop world this whole thing like, oh man, I could do my book, and everybody, and Ice-T and Chuck D did books of their own way back before 50 Cent did. Yeah. And very good books too, by the way. But so I think there was a thing at a certain point in the mid 2000s where every rapper's like, "Yeah, I'm going to do my book, and I'm going to make all this money and do that," and pretty much none of them did it. So at a certain point there was that going around where it made things a little more difficult for me. But it's like any.
the way these chapters happen, I'm always very appreciative, and I haven't covered every album I want to cover, but I think that the ones that I have covered are the ones that were meant to happen. You know, if someone surrounds themselves with all these handlers and publicists and stuff to keep people like me away, then, you know, that's their choice, and that's fine. So I did a Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince chapter. I didn't talk to Will Smith. I tried 18 different ways, and he's Will Smith. So I understand that, and so I also, with the Jazzy Jeff chapter, I went overboard with all of the other people involved in that. And including Jazzy Jeff, who gave me tons and tons of great stuff. So usually I wouldn't do that. If it was a solo artist, obviously I couldn't do the Ice-T record if Ice-T wasn't going to talk to me. So, you know, I just appreciate when these artists take the time to do it, and it's not just for me, because it's for fans who want to know more. And I think the fans appreciate it, and then the artists also realize that the fans appreciate it, you know? So, but yeah, I mean, it's a different world now, and a good world in some ways. You mentioned the whole 144 characters, but there's also, back in 1987, if you couldn't follow Big Daddy Kane or Chuck D on Twitter, and it gives some artists like a way to connect with fans in a deeper way than they've ever been able to do. Sometimes that can, you know, it depends on how people use it, but I think that's one thing that's kind of interesting. I think when that becomes the only avenue, then yes, it's problematic. But I think it's pretty incredible the funniest thing, if you go to Doom's Twitter, it says he has like 35,000 followers. Have you ever gone?
I feel like I've gone, and it said something like, is that the one that says I'll never?
There's one tweet, and it says MF Doom is not on Twitter.
Right. Yes. That's.
But it's his verified account.
Yeah.
And so there's all these people. I forget if it was Jay-Z or Kanye. One of those two guys had a Twitter account. I think it was Kanye, but he never tweeted. This is years ago. And there were all these followers that were just waiting, like, what's his first, you know, it was like, remember when the Pope had his first tweet, and everyone was like waiting. So, and now Kanye won't shut up, obviously, but, which is funny too. That's like interesting for fans as well, for sure. But that's kind of a cool thing. I mean, if you think about how back in the golden age, everything was kind of mediated either through the media, or through a record label. And artists very rarely, except for if you saw them on the street or backstage at a show or something, if you were lucky enough, you could talk, if you wanted to say something to Chuck D. Now I could just tweet him right now and be like, Chuck, your music has meant so much to me, and he'll say thanks, you know, or retweet it. And like, that's really cool to have that kind of an avenue. Or in a more extended way, like if someone has a blog, their own website, or does a long Facebook post or something. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, I definitely think, and there, I have ebooks too. So it's kind of like, if you want to have it digitally, then you can have it digitally. If you want to have the actual document, the physical book is I'm pretty proud of the new one, especially because it has tons of images. So it's not just text. There's about 350 images, and those range from photos that I licensed of the people who were taking pictures of the groups back in that era. So there's a really dope photo of Ice Cube that originally ran in the LA Weekly back in 1990 that I licensed. It can also be, there's a tour laminate from Ice Cube, America's Most Wanted tour, and there's magazine ads, all kinds of stuff. There's pictures of early singles and things like that. So, because that's important too, to kind of bring the visual aspect, not just the visual aspect of it, to break up all the text, because it's a lot of text, but it kind of it kind of sucks you into the story even more, because you remember those visuals. You remember, if you're talking about Ice Cube and his attitude, and then you see that photo, you're just like, damn, no, he was a badass, man. Like that was like that was pretty crazy. So, you know, so that's definitely important to me. Not everyone wants to do what I do, and not everyone, you know, has the opportunity. But I guess I shouldn't say that. I self-published it, so everyone does have the opportunity. Anyone can write stuff online and put up stuff on a blog, and I think that's great too. It makes it so that there's definitely a little bit of a fine line between everybody being able to be a quote unquote journalist, and then maybe everyone shouldn't necessarily they certainly have the right, but they don't have the right to be treated as there's a certain amount of gatekeeping. But the best thing is you can make your own decision whether you want to read something that's out there or not. That at least there's that opportunity. So. Because I started out basically writing for fanzines in the earliest days, and that's kind of the same landscape in a weird way of what blogs are all about. So it's just this kind of very kind of like anyone can do it, and if you find that you have a certain skill at it and people seem to care what you're doing, then you'll kind of rise through the ranks and start writing for magazines, and maybe you don't, but. So you're here in the Northwest for just a couple more days, and you're heading back to Boston. Yep, back to Boston.
But the book tour continues. You gonna do any more signings?
I'll be doing some stuff. I mean, I've been kind of pushing this book for about 6 months because I'm doing it all on my own. It's kind of on my own dime, and whenever I can get some kind of paid things like at a university, I'll try and branch out from that. But I have some stuff. I mean, you can follow me. You can find me on Twitter, Good Road BC. My website is waxfacts, FACTS, press.com. So I'll be doing some stuff. I'm doing Toronto in another month or so in May. I go back and forth to New York a lot. Okay. I was just in New York last weekend with Master Ace. I did a thing at this record store in Brooklyn called Rough Trade. So but for the most part, I guess this is kind of my swan song for really my heavy push on the book. But I'm really proud of the book, and I'm a publicist by trade, so I won't be shutting up about it anytime soon. But I don't know, and I may come back. I mean, hopefully I'll come back. I did a California tour from LA to the Bay in November, but I was just talking to DJ Zimmy about who's a great guy. I'd never met him. I spoke with him yesterday, and he was saying, you should do like team up with some brand, and then you could literally start in LA and work your way up the coast all the way up to Seattle and Vancouver. And I was like, I'm down. Like, I'd love to. So I'm open to whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think I've done a lot to kind of get the word out there, and but the good thing is I have 2 distributors, so you can generally find it places, but you can also buy the books directly from me if you prefer, and I'm happy to sign them. I do a lot at the holidays, people getting kind of gifts for friends and family and things like that. Right. So it's been a fun trip, and the best thing to me is just to be able to have these kind of conversations. Like the books are a huge pain to do, as you can probably imagine. And so, I wouldn't call doing the books fun. I mean, the interviews are fun. Yeah. The prepping the interviews is not fun. Yeah. Transcribing the interviews is not fun. Yeah. Writing is not fun. But once it's done, then I get to be able to do these kind of events where I don't like doing presentations. I like having discussions. I like getting together with other fans or artists who are obviously fans, and just kind of talking about it. And this is the fun stuff for me to just kind of get to meet great people like you and just talk about the music that's part of all of our lives. So
that's what's up. Brian Coleman, the latest book is Check the Technique, Volume 2. Now, I read somewhere that this may be the end of the series, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, it's hopefully not the last book I'm going to write, but it's probably the end of this series, just because, I mean, I mentioned before, I've done 66 chapters. Yeah. I have a very low threshold for repetition. I get bored very easily, and I've done the same format. I've done the same thing, different albums, obviously, so it's made it exciting, but I've done it for 10 years now. So it'd probably be the last one in the series, because I feel like the chapters I always wanted to do and haven't been able to do, they're just probably not going to happen. Because and it's almost always because the people are big, they're either billionaires, certain people who make headphones, or and or they're TV stars and
right.
have talk shows, female talk show hosts. Not naming any names.
Nope.
But and that's fine. It's like I hope the people I'm referring to, not so mysteriously, will write their own books. Like that's great. But so I feel like the chapters that I've done so far are the ones that were realistic and they're meant to happen, and they did, and I'm proud of them. So I'll hopefully do other books, but not, I doubt, in this series. If someone wants to back up a truck with a lot of money and dump it on my doorstep, which I don't think will happen, I'd be happy to do that. So if there are any millionaire publishers out there, please give me a call. Otherwise, yes, this will be the last one.
That's what's up. Well, man, I cannot express how much of a pleasure it is for me to have you take a couple minutes to sit down.
Hey, man, I really appreciate it. It was great to talk to you.
Absolutely. Once again, let everybody know where they can get the book and where they can follow you.
So you can buy the book. I would say please don't buy it on Amazon, because there are plenty of people who do that, and I don't really there's a lot of other better places. So there are local stores in Portland, like Compound Gallery. Yep. They had already been supporting my book. That's kind of why I'm doing it with them, because they're already kind of part of the family. Yeah. There's other places. I don't know if Powell's. I mean, I would hope Powell's. If they don't, go in there and tell them that they better. Yeah, exactly. But I think they probably should have it. I have some good distribution. You can always order, and then if you go to my website, you can either order it from me directly, or it even has places in Europe and the UK where you could order the book too if you're from there. So my website is wax, W-A-X, facts, F-A-C-T-S, press, P-R-E-S-S.com. I'm on Twitter at GoodRoadBC, and I'm on Instagram, which is a fairly new thing that I'm not really that swift at yet, but I'm trying, at Check the Tech, T-E-C-H. So yeah, people, you can definitely find me. You can Google my name, Brian Coleman, and yeah, I'm not hiding. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm around, so you can get at me, and hopefully I'll meet some great people in Portland and Seattle coming up, and then it's back to the east for me, and hopefully some spring.
That's what's up, man. That's what's up. Brian Coleman, Check the Technique, Volume 2. My man, you will be continually be supported by everything that I'm doing.
I appreciate it, Klyph.
So the next time you're in the Northwest, or we can get you on the phone too.
Yeah, no doubt. Again. It's I love it out here. It's beautiful, beautiful country, great people. So I'll definitely be back.
No doubt. Thank you so much, my man.
Thank you.
All right, man. Blessings.